This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Hey now, wrestling fans. It's time for another episode of Wrestling's Greatest Moments. Sit back as Wrestling's Greatest Moments takes a look at Wild Wrestling What Ifs, the 70s and 80s, Volume 1. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. So, what if Jim Crockett Promotions had stayed in business, or any other promotion that opposed the WWF? What if Hulk Hogan had stayed in the American Wrestling Association, the AWA, instead of leaving for the WWF? Wrestling fans love to speculate on these scenarios, much as history buffs enjoy speculating on what might have happened if the Axis powers won World War II, the Apollo space program had failed, and many other interesting scenarios. Let's dive into some of the most asked what-if scenarios. And as always, don't worry if some of your favorites are missing, as this is just the beginning of this series. Unless viewers don't enjoy it, in which case our next question will be, what if fans cared about what-if videos? How things work. In this video, we'll use alternative history, that is, the exploration of how events might have played out if key historical moments had played out differently. At times, we'll also use counterfactual history, a similar concept that uses plausible what-if questions to understand what caused historical events, such as the WWF's rise to prominence. Ric Flair retires in 1975. One of wrestling's biggest what-ifs revolves around one wrestler sitting in a different seat during an airplane ride. As wrestling's greatest moments covered in our video, the deadly plane crash that nearly ended wrestling, wrestler Johnny Valentine was seriously injured in the crash and forced to retire. Valentine was one of several wrestling talents injured in the crash, including Jim Crockett Promotions announcer David Crockett and wrestlers Bob Bruggers, Tim Mr. Wrestling Woods, and Nature Boy Ric Flair. The accident sidelined Ric Flair for months, and early on, doctors told Flair his wrestling career was over. In an incredible display of personal courage, Flair devoted himself to physical rehabilitation, dropping considerable weight. He'd previously worked out as a bulky power-based wrestler, and unveiled the more polished technical wrestler he became best known for. However, Ric Flair's fate could have been much different. According to historian and journalist Mike Mooneyham, Flair was supposed to have been in Valentine's seat. He originally was in that seat next to the pilot, but Johnny said he was kind of scared to be up there. He said Flair kept whining until Johnny said, "You get in the back, I'll sit up here in the front." So it really could have changed the future of wrestling. Flair was a rising star at the time, and while he wasn't Crockett's biggest star at the time of the crash, Booker George Scott was building him to take on that role. The Nature Boy ultimately became the promotion's #1 star, and later, the face of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, as its World Heavyweight Champion, the last major star to tour the NWA's various territories defending the title. While it's certain that Jim Crockett Promotions would have survived without Flair, his loss would have impacted it significantly. Flair played a pivotal role in the promotion's success, including the power promoter Jim Crockett Jr. had from booking Flair more in his promotion than other NWA territories once the Nature Boy became world champion. Ric Flair epitomized the NWA style of professional wrestling for many fans, providing a clear alternative to the cartoonish WWF and its champion Hulk Hogan. Without Flair, could the NWA and later JCP have stood out as such an alternative? Like Hogan, Ric Flair was a very special talent who served as a catalyst for some of wrestling's greatest storylines and feuds. For example, how successful would Ricky Steamboat have been without Ric Flair to serve as his rival? Consider this. Steamboat had good programs with Roddy Piper and Greg Valentine, but they paled compared to his rivalry with Flair. Also, Flair exemplified synergy, the idea that when elements work together, their collective outcome is greater than the sum of their efforts. Case in point, the Four Horsemen. Flair was the anchor for the legendary faction, a faction which turned every member into top stars. Could Crockett have found a wrestler as talented as Flair who could work as a heel or babyface as needed? Perhaps, but what if another promoter was able to get their wrestler booked as a world champion? Ted DiBiase's name was often considered, and given DiBiase's relationship with Mid-South Wrestling's Bill Watts, who wasn't an NWA member but who maintained ties with the company, a DiBiase reign as NWA World Champ might have boosted Mid-South's already notable success. JCP might have folded sooner than it did in our timeline without Flair. Instead, Flair helped Jim Crockett Promotions thrive and provide an alternative to the WWF. However, mismanagement and other factors eventually doomed Crockett before the promotion was sold to Ted Turner and renamed World Championship Wrestling. Now, Flair would prove invaluable in WCW, just as he did in JCP. As we'll see with many of our what-ifs, the loss of one wrestler or a major deviation in our timeline doesn't mean the end of wrestling, but it's clear that wrestling would have suffered a significant impact. Superstar Billy Graham turns babyface. In 1977, superstar Billy Graham began an extended reign as WWF champion, defeating Bruno Sammartino in controversial fashion. Unlike past heel champions Ivan Koloff and Stan Stasiak, Graham wasn't a short-term champion. Instead, promoter Vince McMahon Sr. used Graham's long reign to prepare his next champion, Bob Backlund, to get over with WWF fans. By the time Vince was preparing to put the title on Backlund, Graham was being cheered by a noticeable number of fans. While Graham played a heel, his colorful outfits, larger-than-life physique, incredible charisma, and unique promos made him irresistible. While Superstar's matches weren't known for being technical clinics, his style fit in well with the WWF, and there were talks of him turning babyface and continuing his reign. Unfortunately, Vince McMahon Sr. wasn't about to change his plans, and Graham dropped the belt to Backlund. This devastated Graham psychologically, and he began a downward spiral that affected him personally and professionally. Billy Graham recalls pleading with Vince Sr. to give him more time and to turn him face. Graham claims he would have gladly put Dusty Rhodes or Bruno Sammartino over, but he felt Bob Backlund didn't have the CC, the charisma connection. Vince, Backlund's not there yet, and in my opinion, he never will be. Everybody knows it. He isn't the new Bruno. Give him another year in the bullpen. Let me have my babyface run as champion. Vince shook his head. In the most compassionate voice he could muster, he replied, "Billy, my mind's set on Bob Backlund. I'm committed." According to Vince McMahon Jr., Graham seemed like a good choice, but all the stars had lined up for superstar Billy Graham, and I wish it lasted longer than it did. I thought he would have been an extraordinary babyface, but my dad didn't see it that way. It wasn't traditional. The way of thinking back then was that you couldn't have someone his size as a babyface. How could you get sympathy for him? McMahon Sr. was a promoter who tended to stick to his long-term plans. It's hard to argue with this, given his success. That's why it seems unlikely that he would have changed his mind. In this scenario, Vince McMahon has no choice as Bob Backlund is seriously injured. In this alternate reality, it could be a motor vehicle accident or an in-ring injury that would sideline him for 6 months or even jeopardize his career. An automobile accident isn't a stretch, as Backlund was involved in one right before he entered the WWF. In his memoir, the two-time world champion recalls, "Right before I entered the WWF, I bought a brand new 1977 gray Buick Electra in Cambridge, Minnesota, and I was showing it off back in Princeton. We had all had a few beers, and I was going home late at night and went to make a right turn on Silver Lane, lost control of the car in the gravel, slammed into a telephone pole, and put my head through the windshield. There was only 58 miles on the car at the time of the accident, and frankly, I was lucky to have lived through it." What if the crash was worse, or Backlund was arrested for drunk driving, which, it's worth pointing out, wasn't treated as seriously in the 1970s? Backlund claims the police didn't find his car keys, and also, things certainly might have turned out very differently for me and for Corky if anything about that accident had gone a different way. Here, Vince McMahon realizes he spent the last year building Backlund up and he has no immediate replacement. While he has long-term babyfaces, including Ivan Putski and Chief Jay Strongbow, he doesn't feel that they're world championship material. Dusty Rhodes is a possibility, but Rhodes may not want to commit to the WWF as he's a top star wherever he goes. Vince McMahon Sr.'s policy of sticking to his long-term plans is sorely tested when Backlund is removed as the heir apparent to the WWF title. While Vince considers his options, it becomes clear that the fans are getting behind Billy Graham. Despite his reservations, McMahon opts to turn Graham babyface and give him a test run while he considers other options. There's no denying that Graham is a hit at the box office. Can this transfer over if he stays as a babyface? McMahon has Ivan Koloff turn on the superstar during a match, leaving the champion a bloody mess. This leads to a white-hot feud between the two. As the match makes the rounds in the WWF circuit, McMahon realizes that Graham can play a sympathetic babyface. Graham isn't an underdog, but like Andre the Giant, he knows how to present himself as vulnerable. As time passes, McMahon pits Graham against various rule breakers, often creating situations where Graham is forced to battle monster heels, much as Hulk Hogan would do during his 1980s run. The formula proves so successful that McMahon keeps Graham around as champion for years. In Graham's case, the only question of how long is whether he can keep his personal demons in check, and how long his steroid-fueled body can endure. Graham's success makes it likely that other promotions take notice, and while the AWA and NWA are reluctant to change how they book world champions, Graham's success is enough that Vern Gagne opts to put the AWA World Championship on Hulk Hogan. Where this leaves the WWF if Vince McMahon Jr. buys it is something we'll look at shortly. David Von Erich lives. David Von Erich's passing symbolized the beginning of the end for world-class championship wrestling promoter Fritz Von Erich's attempts to turn his sons into a wrestling dynasty. But what if David hadn't died? While debate still exists as to the cause of death, a controversial question that we'll leave to you, the viewer, to decide. There's no debate that David Von Erich was at the time considered the most viable Von Erich to win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. World-class championship wrestling was a top territory in the NWA at the time, and might have surpassed Jim Crockett Promotions in power depending on the success of David's reign as world champion and how long he held the title. As noted, there are conflicting claims to David's death. The Von Erich family has maintained that David died from some sort of physical ailment, including acute enteritis. In 1984, the Dallas Morning News reported that David died Friday of acute enteritis, an inflammation of the intestine. Medical officials in Tokyo said Saturday. The disease, which generally attacks the large intestine and usually is not fatal, can be contracted in several ways, from having a virus to eating contaminated food, officials with the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office said Saturday. The other prevailing theory is that David died from a drug overdose. Wrestling lore has it that Bruiser Brody found drugs on David's person and flushed them down the toilet, not wanting the family to have to deal with the bad publicity and out of respect for Fritz Von Erich, who was instrumental in his early wrestling career. Like many aspects of the Von Erich brothers' private lives, things were not going well for David. David had been reeling, drinking too much, and using painkillers as he broke away from the stern hand of his father Fritz to make his own mark in Florida, and then onto his own tour of Japan. In addition, David's personal life had been shaken by a divorce and the crib death of his infant child. The book, Brody, details the circumstances surrounding David's death when he traveled to Japan to begin a wrestling tour. On February 10th, Goodish, along with referee Joe Higuchi and wrestler Jerry Morrow, went to David's room when he didn't arrive for that night's card. They found David on the bed, telephone book in hand. He was dead. Brody took matters into his own hands. In that room, Goodish thought of his long relation with David's father and his friendship with the other boys. Then he took the remaining pills and flushed them down the toilet before tossing the bottle. Frank saw no reason for the family to suffer further agony with the media and the business. He protected his friend as best as he could. In either case, what if David Von Erich had lived? If he suffered acute enteritis, he might have been saved had he told someone about it. If he died from a drug overdose, what if someone discovered David before he passed away and he was resuscitated? Take your pick. But the near-death experience changes David's thinking in this alternate timeline. Whether he embraces the Christianity that has always seemed to be a part of the Von Erich mythos, or he just changes his lifestyle in some other way, David not only lives a cleaner life, he convinces his brothers to straighten out and take advantage of the incredible fame they're enjoying. Here, David Von Erich wins the NWA World Heavyweight Championship from Nature Boy Ric Flair. Unlike Kerry Von Erich, NWA officials see David as stable and capable of dealing with the stress of a constant touring. David's previous success as a heel also means NWA officials believe he can defend the title in any territory, working as needed whether he plays a heel or a babyface. David's reign proved successful, and Fritz parlays the success into expanding his world-class promotion to other regions. At its peak, World Class was syndicated into more than 60 markets across the country. Wrestling lore has it that Fritz considered taking his promotion national. Unfortunately, by the time he did so, his roster was a shadow of itself and its fan base had shrunk. World Class had much going for it, including a deep roster, superior booking, and the subtle but important details that could make it stand out from other wrestling promotions. For example, World Class boasted better production values than many promotions at the time, thanks to its run on the Christian Broadcasting Network's Dallas station, KXTX, Channel 39. A KXTX producer masterminded a new-style wrestling show that was briskly paced and employed 4 cameras, instant replays, and features edited to the beat of hit songs, a la MTV. In almost every respect, the program's slick production values foreshadowed the manufacturing of Hulkamania on the East Coast 3 years later. Fritz von Erich would still face the same challenges as he did in our timeline, including Vince McMahon poaching talent and tensions with promoter Jim Crockett Jr., who would prefer that Ric Flair hold the NWA title. However, David Von Erich's presence allows Fritz to hold more shows featuring his sons and even lend them to other promotions. If David can avoid his personal demons and his brothers follow suit, World Class would be even more successful and have more stability to attract and keep top talent. Consequently, World Class enjoys more success in this timeline and stays with the NWA rather than leaving it after Fritz tires of playing second banana to Jim Crockett Promotions. Fritz ignores offers from the WWF to join forces and instead works with the AWA and NWA when they form Pro Wrestling USA, providing even more talent to the organization. While it's unlikely Pro Wrestling USA would fare any better in this reality, mainly due to the infighting among promoters, it's possible that it could last longer and might have put more pressure on the WWF by running shows in the New York market. Another possibility is that Fritz might have teamed up with Larry Matysik, who began running his own promotion after the NWA St. Louis Wrestling Club's Sam Muchnick's retirement. Matysik writes in Wrestling at the Chase how he warned Fritz von Erich that Vince McMahon was intent on going national and crushing the competition. I propose we strike up our own alliance, in the process answering Koppler's concerns about a stable core of talent, something that Vince had obviously and rightly convinced Ted was crucial since my wrestlers were independents. With Fritz and me doing a St. Louis-style show on one channel and Von Erich's world-class program airing on another, we might have been able to derail Vince's plans. Unfortunately, Von Erich wasn't convinced, assuming Vince McMahon Jr. would be like his father. In this timeline, Von Erich may see things differently, including the instances where promoters work with the WWF only for Vince to usurp control. Hulk Hogan stays in the AWA. Hulk Hogan, AWA World Heavyweight Champion. As any wrestling fan who watched Hulk Hogan in Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association will tell you, Hulkamania began in the AWA. Vern Gagne's reluctance to put the belt on Hogan because he wasn't an amateur wrestler, coupled with Gagne's penny-wise but pound-foolish policy of fighting with Hogan over merchandise, led to Hogan jumping to Vince McMahon's WWF. This jump caused a seismic shift in the wrestling world, enabling Vince McMahon to fulfill his dreams of going national. However, what if Gagne had a moment of lucidity and realized just how big Hogan could be, as well as how much Vince McMahon wanted to put him out of business? After all, Vern was losing touch with his fan base, but showed acumen by signing the Road Warriors and the Fabulous Freebirds, two of wrestling's hottest acts. Gagne also saw value in merchandise, something evident by his licensing AWA action figures. Vern also saw the value of airing shows on cable television, aligning with ESPN to reach a bigger audience. Hulk Hogan remaining in the AWA would have energized the promotion, possibly motivating keeping some of the talent who abandoned ship for the WWF. It also could have led to outstanding talent coming to the AWA rather than the WWF. Undoubtedly, the AWA would have enjoyed a robust business with Hogan at the top. It's important to remember that the AWA didn't bottom out when Hulk Hogan left, with the promotion still doing decent business, but eventually bottoming out due to the loss of talent and economic factors. If Hulkamania continued in the AWA, the promotion could grow in other markets. Like any what-if scenario, events are still playing out as they did in our timeline. The only question is, what events succeed in this timeline based on ripple effects of the point of divergence? For example, Hogan staying in the AWA. Perhaps the greatest question here is whether Vince McMahon could have taken the WWF National with someone at the top besides Hulk Hogan. Even without Hogan, Vince McMahon would have a clear vision of how to conquer the wrestling world. As promoter Larry Matysik remembers Vince had more imagination and energy than anyone I've ever met. Ideas spewed out of him, like lava from a volcano. No wonder he was able to discover and refine revenue streams previously untapped by the industry. Nonetheless, a few select others, with similar opportunities, could have been equally innovative. The question with Vince is whether he could have found someone like Hulk Hogan to build his promotion around. Now that seems doubtful. As discussed in our video, Wrestlers in Line to Become WWF Champion Part 2, McMahon had choices besides Hogan, but it's unclear whether they would have opted to work in the WWF and how much McMahon could tap into them. As fans saw with McMahon's other attempts to replicate Hogan's success, chief among them the Ultimate Warrior, Hogan was one of a kind, the right person in the right place at the right time. Now this doesn't mean Vern Gagne would have taken the AWA National, landed a deal like the WWF on NBC, Saturday night's main event, or taken out of the territories. Gagne would likely have used pay-per-view to increase revenue. Depending on how aggressive Vince McMahon is in his timeline, Gagne might team with Jim Crockett Promotions and other territories to keep the WWF in check. Then again, Hogan's success could have made Gagne feel he didn't need any other promotion's help, leaving the NWA to battle it out with the WWF. Seeing Hogan's success, McMahon might gamble and throw a lot of money Hogan's way to sign him. Whether the stars would be in alignment for the WWF to succeed as it did in 1984 is unknown. The Rock and Wrestling connection played a key role in the WWF's success. Pop star Cyndi Lauper's influence on the WWF's mainstream success is discussed at length, which you can see in our video, Madison Square Garden Magic, The Brawl to End It All, for more about how pop star Cyndi Lauper played a key role in the WWF's success. Unfortunately, Vince McMahon might be unable to piggyback on Lauper's success if Hogan didn't enter the WWF until later. Hogan staying in the AWA would have hurt Vince McMahon's plans to go national. Although Vern Gagne wasn't as aggressive as McMahon in his expansion, Gagne would still look to grow the AWA, and this would be easier with Hulk Hogan as the face of the promotion. Hogan's success might even lead Gagne to realize how many fans he could get if he tapped into the youthful audience, which made Hulkamania successful. Do you think these what-ifs would have played out as we've speculated? Are there any other scenarios you'd like to see us cover? Share your thoughts in the comment section and let us know if there are any videos you'd like Wrestling's Greatest Moments to cover. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel, follow us on X and Instagram, and spread the good news about Wrestling's Greatest Moments, the channel that celebrates the squared circle.